Tell us about a situation when your intuition saved your life. It happened when I went home from somewhere. There wasn't much time, but it was winter, so it was getting dark very early. Anyway, I'm chasing some guy in a red sweater and red sports shoes, and I realize he's looking at me funny. Well, I think maybe he's drunk, or high. I keep walking. I turn around. He is still behind me. I decide to cross the road. He crosses right behind me. I feel uncomfortable. I go around the corner of the nearest house. I dash to my house, nervously enter the code for the gate in front of the house, and stand there, waiting. About a minute later, this guy shows up. Seen that I'm at the gate with a code lock. Looks me straight in the eye for about 10 seconds. Said nothing and goes back. Gives me goosebumps. I woke up at 3 o'clock. For some reason, I was very uneasy. I see my cat is also on the fritz. Ears bobbed, afraid to move away from my feet. My heart raced even faster. What's wrong is unclear because I haven't heard anything strange. There was just some sort of uneasy feeling that wouldn't let me relax. I decided to go to the kitchen, turned on the light everywhere and got something to eat. I didn't really feel like eating, though. After a while, I went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and realized that at night, someone was trying to sneak into our living room through the window. I could see on the glass that someone was trying to make a big hole with a tool, but in the middle of the process stopped. I suspect that I scared him, or them, with the lights on. Changed. What's interesting, at the same time we were having a showdown with our neighbors that had been going on for 3 years. They used to really like to walk on our property. So, in retaliation, we put a 3-meter fence between us, which caused them a lot of complaints. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but the attempted break-in happened right after we put up the fence, and 2 days before they moved out. To be honest, I'm unspeakably glad those freaks are somewhere far away now. The cat probably woke you up. We might not hear the glass cutter, but they're very sensitive to that sort of thing. I was woken up by a cat once when he heard a mouse in the house. I wouldn't have been paying attention at all myself. That night I was moonlighting as a waitress in a pub. Some guy came up to me and tried to take my number. I blew him off. It's a pretty normal situation, nothing strange. The dude, as it seemed to me, didn't care either. Then the bar closed and I started to go home. As usual, I headed for the back exit to the parking lot. But as I was walking to the door, I noticed that the light sensor outside went off. That meant someone was standing right outside the door. That made me feel a little uncomfortable. So I went back to the bar and asked the guard to escort me to my car. Just as we walked out of the building, I saw this dude standing around the corner holding a belt, as if it was garrote, execution weapon. He apparently didn't expect me to be alone and started yelling at me what a bitch I was and that I should die. Then he ran off in the direction of the roadway, and I never saw him again. I'm a firefighter. A call comes in. A power line fell down. The nearest trees caught fire. We jump into our fire truck. We drive to the scene. Everything's okay. I have complete confidence in our driver and team leader. Our driver parks right next to the nearby power lines. Another whole bunch of us get out of the car and into the street. Meanwhile, the wind is raging like hell, and I can see that the other lines are walking around too. They might break. I go to our leader and voice my concern. He's like, yeah, relax, everything's gonna be fine. Well, okay, we quickly get the hose and I get ready to extinguish the trees. They were the first priority because there was a high chance the flames would spill over to the next house. Next thin, I'm looking up and the wires are swinging wildly and I instinctively yelled, "Get the hell out of there!" And what do you think? A few seconds later, as we began to run away, another line came off. It was still connected to the pole, which meant that if we had stayed, there was a huge chance that there would have been only embers left of the 3 of us. A friend called us to a party that a classmate had invited him to. We jump in the car, drive to the address, and realize that the neighborhood looks suspiciously creepy. We see the right house, in the backyard with some lights on, but it's too quiet for a party. We thought it was all very strange and drove back. After a while, our friend called us and said he had been robbed there and that there really was no party. His classmate wanted to set us all up. When I was 5, I was almost kidnapped by some strange people. My father and I were in the park. My father was about 100 meters away from me and was talking to his friend. At that time, some people came up to me, said they had a lot of toys, and called me to play in their motorhome. One of them had already held out his hand to me, when suddenly I felt a strange sensation in my stomach. I looked at my dad and yelled loudly, pointing it in my father's direction. Years later, it turned out that these people had already kidnapped children. Since then, I always listened to my intuition. Changed, thanks for the positive comments. When Dad recovered from the shock, he scolded me for running away and talking to strangers. Mom later confessed to me that when he came home, he burst into tears and started blaming himself for everything. But I think more on the positive side. My intuition didn't let me down, and now my instinct for self-preservation is even stronger. I believe it happened to me for a reason. The story is not mine, but my mom's. November 18th, 1987, as a teenager, she came to London to visit a girlfriend. At about 7:20 p.m., while at King's Cross Station, she felt something strange and decided to take a cab. 10 minutes later, a fire broke out at the station that took the lives of 30 of the 40 people inside. If she had taken the subway then, she probably would have died too. I was at a party in a very dysfunctional neighborhood. As a teenager, I made a lot of stupid decisions. At some point, there was a huge mess on the second floor. I had no idea who was fighting over what, but the tension was building and I decided it was time to get out. I called my buddies over and we left. It wasn't even 10 minutes before we learned that after we left, someone had pulled a gun, fired a few shots, and accidentally shot one girl. Later, we found out someone had stolen a coconut from this dude. He didn't like it and came back with a gun, started threatening people, lost control of the situation, and shot the innocent girl. Changed. Let me clarify right away that by coconut, I mean drugs, not plants. It was October at about 8 p.m., so it was already dark outside. Some guy came up to me on the bus and said something along the lines of, "What a beautiful weather today." I didn't really mention it. He got off at the same stop as me. My gut began to hint that I should be careful with him. I crossed the street so that he could overtake me a little and was always in my line of sight. One thing that is important to note next is that to approach my house, you have to go up a small hill with a high brick wall running along it. It's a very secluded road up there. Usually, I always listen to music while walking this piece, but not this time. As I reach the middle of the hill, I sense that something is going wrong. I pull my phone out of my pocket and start dialing my mom. At the same moment, I hear someone speeding up behind me and flying right at me. I knew right away it was that man. I turned around abruptly, looked him right in the eyes, and answered my mom. "Yeah, Mom, hello?" This obviously scared him off, and he suddenly slowed down and looked like he was just out for an evening jog. I explained the situation to my mom and told her not to hang up. Her boyfriend ran out and walked me home, and the dude just disappeared. 100% he was running at me, I'm sure of it. The fact that I turned to him and talked to my mom obviously freaked him out. My daughter was a year and a half at the time. She had a bit of a cold, but she usually slept pretty well. I woke up in the middle of the night with a terrible anxiety and discomfort. Something was wrong, but there was no obvious reason. I got up, skewered, and tried to calm down a bit. I decided to check in on the kids one more time before I went to bed. They lived in the same room. I went in there and also heard a slight wheezing sound coming from the crib. It was so quiet that it was just impossible to hear it from the other room. I take my daughter in my arms and feel that she is breathing very fast and with great difficulty. We went to the hospital. The baby is taken away from me overnight to put an inhaler on her, because, as it turned out, she had a lack of oxygen. In the end, they diagnosed her with reactive airway dysfunction syndrome caused by a cold, which in turn caused an automatic seizure. I was 14 years old and in high school. One day, on my way home from school, I noticed a man following me. He was walking, staring at his phone, and trying not to look in my direction. He was wearing a cap, so I couldn't really see his face. Anyway, I sensed right away that he was kind of weird. As I approached my house, I saw that he was still behind me. I realized that this is unlikely our neighbor, because in our house, I knew everyone. At the last second, I decided not to go into the stairwell. I turned around and walked towards the store. Then I called my mom and waited for her to pick me up. A few weeks went by, we watched the news, and it turns out that 2 days after my incident, an 11-year-old girl from my school was kidnapped right outside our house. The dude was caught, and he looked a lot like the dude who was following me. Given the timeline and how close to us it happened, I'm pretty sure it was the same dude. I was riding my motorcycle, my friend was on the back. We were driving on the highway outside of town, and at some point we found ourselves behind a big truck stuffed with old tires. Suddenly I sensed that we shouldn't drive right behind it and decided to slow down a bit, thus letting it get away from us. Just as I slowed down, tires popped out of the truck and landed right where we were supposed to be. Once my wife and I were at a market in downtown Chico, California. It's important to note that I'm a very tall white guy and my wife is a very short Asian girl. We're walking around picking something out. All of a sudden, across the crowd, I see two big dudes. One was tall too, other is short. The short one had a swastika like Charles Manson on his forehead. We crossed eyes with him. He looked at me, then at his friend and pointed his finger at me. I notified my wife and told her we better get out of here. She tried to calm me down like, "What the hell?" She said I was exaggerating, but I insisted and we left. About 6 months later, we're watching a show, They're Wanted in America. And guess who we see? Our two buddies arrested for a drug-related double homicide in Orville. We still think back to that story from time to time. 15 years later, it still gives me the creeps. Sometimes I like to smoke. Once I tried to call my drug dealer, but he didn't pick up the phone. Some time passes. He picks up the phone and says, "Bro, there's a lot of cops all over the place today. Come on in, but make it quick." I drove up to him. I drove for about 10 minutes. Suddenly I feel some kind of strange nausea and anxiety. I remembered what he told me and thought to hell with it. Went home. Watching the news in the evening, TSE had a gang of meth dealers busted. 6 people were arrested. I checked the address and it's my man's house. I still thank heaven I turned around that day. Otherwise, who knows? I might have been behind bars too. Thanks so much for watching. In the comments below the video, tell us about a situation where your intuition saved your life. And don't forget to watch our other episodes. Bye.